question. Is this working? Yeah.
Yes.
On the perspective that we are institutionally just accrediting folks, then for now that would be our role, and what we would be doing in Alfredo's case is certifying your knowledge. So we wouldn't be providing, I'm sorry, oh, you need to stand, sorry. So we wouldn't be providing the knowledge is out there. You learn it collectively, connectively, and what we do is we certify. Somehow we test you. And that's the second part of my question. As an institution that certifies knowledge, then how do you grade, how do you evaluate people's knowledge in a sense that is not structured, it's not bound by any set parameters, people can learn what they want, so how do I evaluate that?
I don't know. Well, see, there's a few things that, this is one of the, in 2001, when we were, group of us were at least starting to get involved in, using blogs and other social media online, and when we were starting to talk about open education, what open education might look like, we had a lot of questions that took years to actually get an answer to. And I'm not sure, there's a concept by Kaufman called the adjacent possible. If you're familiar with a recent text that Stephen Johnson did on, on basically where good ideas come from. And he took he's from an evolutionary perspective. He says certain things are only possible if certain conditions are in place. Once those conditions are in place, a new range of possibilities occurs. And what the adjacent possible, what's close by is what's possible. And I think the same holds true with openness in education. At the time, in even 2000, all we could really do is just basically drop content online because bandwidth, the quality of connections, the tools that we had. So the adjacent possible at that time was making content available. Over time, as we got a little bit better at it, Yale decided they would do Open Yale Initiative, which actually produces exceptional quality video lectures and puts them online. In 2003, that really wasn't an option because, well, we didn't even have YouTube at the time, and video was really expensive to do well online, and we didn't quite have a model for it. But with YouTube and other streaming tools, suddenly the adjacent possible, what was possible, became the use of these tools for doing live video recording. And now we're getting closer to large-scale interactive learning, social learning through the model that I demonstrated briefly. At each stage, we have to sort of answer the questions that we're faced with before we can go to the next stage, which means we can answer the next questions. And I don't think we're quite at a point yet where we can meaningfully answer your question about accreditation. How can we grade students who participate in these kinds of courses? There are different models that we can use. We've in the first course, CCK08 and CCK09, I graded like a traditional, you would expect in a traditional course. I took the papers the students submitted, I commented on them, marked them, emailed them back, asked for improvements, whatever else. And then based on that, we had a matrix that I used at least for grading, and I would say you received an A or you received a B in this course. That's one model, and chances are in the short term we're just going to transfer that online and into online environments. So technically, if I was to go into Moodle, it can tell me how many posts I've made in Moodle, how many comments I've shared. It won't tell me how many blog posts I've done and how many comments I've made on other people's blogs. But even just a quick skim of that would give an educator a sense of, oh, George is or is not quite active in this course, and that might be used as a basis for saying, well, if we know he's active, that might be one part of the grading. Second part might be the quality of the contributions, the depth of the insight, by whatever way we measure that. So those are some potential ways of doing it, but I think what we want to do in terms of reputation is a tool that I mentioned with the group I was speaking with this afternoon, but it's called Radian 6. And basically Radian 6 is what they call social media monitoring and engagement. And it basically just tells you what's happening around your product. It's an analytics dashboard. It tells you what's happening and you can look at what's going on. I'll give you another example here. Let me do Google Analytics. How many of you are familiar with Google Analytics? Okay, so a few of you are. So I'll go to Google Analytics and just have a quick look here at analytics on my site. So traffic is down 6.42%. If you want to look at the the way in which visits have come in, unique page views. You see the regions of the world where page views come in. You see how many people have come in at a particular time. And you can also look at what are the most popular page views lately. There's an article I did on Web 3.0, the X-Web. That's had 728 views. There's an article I did on something to do with connectivism, constructivism. That's had, so anyways, these are, what's happening here is these different tools or these different means of analyzing what's happening gives an individual a dashboard. So it's possible that we could say in the future we'll get an analytics dashboard for George's learning. And it'll tell you, it'll look at where I was on all the sites, where I interact, and it'll say, George, look, you did this and this and this and this, and by looking at that, so it's the dashboard that pulls pieces together of information and then allows an educator to evaluate. I'm guessing, but like I said, we don't have a clear answer right now on what that potentially could look like.
Okay, we're talking about creativity, chaos, and grading systems and accreditation. But what I can see is that our grading system is too old and it's not updated. Okay, we need something new. Do you think that grades and numbers are going to survive? Or does it have to change? Because we have a lot of methods for evaluation. So how do these numbers and grades fit in here?
Well, first of all, I think it's worth saying that grades really don't have anything to do with learning, right? Grades are an administrative task, right? So in terms of learning, they're secondary, I think, to some level. But they're necessary for the system. So I'm not saying burn the system down and start from scratch. I'm saying this is the system we have, and I'll make a statement that I think is reasonably accurate. We will only get to be more focused on grading and similar techniques in the long run. You see it with some of the initiatives, the Department of Education. You see it with accountability measures growing in universities, and especially with public funding being under a fair bit of pressure these days. There's this notion of we want greater accountability from universities, the public institutions, greater, we need to see value for our dollar investment. Yes, we get reports like the Rockefeller Institute says that universities are critical for the national knowledge infrastructure of any country. But by the same account, there is a shift and a move to the practical dimensions. So my short answer is grades are important for the system to function. And right now, I don't see a reasonable contender that is going to disrupt that model significantly because I see it being more entrenched than anything else. Now, there's two things potentially that might come into play, but it's still too early. I mean, there's a lot of individuals who are playing around the edges with alternative assessment techniques. And in the past, I mean, it always was who you studied with determined your competence, not your grades. Grades are really a 200-year-old phenomenon. They're recent as an invention in the system. But they're a quality statement, and some things such as learning are very difficult to get sort of a quantification of, or to be able to say you hit 87% knowledge in this discipline. It's a ludicrous statement because the discipline changes so quickly, and a lot of universities don't necessarily upgrade their information or their knowledge structure as rapidly as it's actually changing. So that's one end. There will always be people who sort of play at the fringes and use that as a basis for experimenting with a model. There's another area which I think potentially we don't necessarily have the tools and the approaches for right now, but I think potentially it has value, and that is that we begin to recognize that assessment is something that happens underground everything else that we're doing with learning. Like with Google Analytics, for example, you drop the code onto your site and it analyzes what's happened on your site. You go to the dashboard, you can see activity that's gone on. It's not explicit. For me, I don't have to go and ask a whole bunch of questions in order to determine what's happening. It runs in the background continually. So I think it's possibly we could see an analytics dashboard model for learning, right? It runs in the background. It tells us what we've learned, kinds of interactions we've had online, the kinds of email exchanges and how that relates to knowledge we're trying to pursue. But that's still a little out there, right? It's tough. So for now, enjoy your grades.